What's going on, guys? Phil Birch here from Unfun Stuff. Gonna be bringing you a pretty special episode of How to Get Away with Meta. I know we took a little bit of time off there because, well, I talked about all the meta decks, so I didn't really have anything to talk about. But I wanted to give you guys something to ponder, think about going into this weekend's provisional and also our Pasadena regional coming up the following weekend. I'm going to be talking about a couple of anti-meta like sleeper decks that I think could have really strong showings and potentially be able to combat the likes of Kirishima and Momo, who we know are going to be like really big contenders and really strong defensive options for the upcoming events. So my definition of anti-meta might not be the same as everybody else's. I don't think it's specifically something you want to play just to be different, because I don't particularly think that the decks that I'm going to name off have great matchups against a lot of things that aren't these very good, strong defensive decks. But into these defensive decks, I think that they do have a really good possibility of having a great game plan and also competing at a really high level. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to have the same success against like Tokiyami or Asui or stuff like that, but I think you should expect a lot of Momos and Kirishimas. And if you're a little bit bored like I am of the format, this might be a little bit a great way to go a little bit outside the box and kind of keep yourself interested. The first deck I want to talk about is Shigaraki, and I guess I'll just talk about the character himself because I think that the deck can be a little bit more broad strokes than I'm giving it credit for. Typically, a character that I would recommend playing under the death symbol because of the likes of Float Combo, which is not necessarily a great card in most characters, is a pretty decent card in Shigaraki. Float Combo offers the character a nice outlet to always have a guaranteed amount of damage in his deck. It always represents 24 damage, assuming you have answers to your opponent's answers, stuff like that. Yes, barring, this, that, and the other. But the reason I like Shigaraki into these particular decks is not necessarily because of his guaranteed damage. It's because of the nice controlled foundation game that he gets to play against them. Both Kirishima and Momo are really, really heavily invested in poking with cards like Back Alley Haymaker, which is a nice, super easy to block mid attack. Well, if you know anything about Shigaraki, like if you are poking with a nice, easy to play attack, and say they're trying to get advantage in any sort of way, well, you are either shutting down the advantage of them building a foundation, so their poke was useless, or they're drawing a card and losing a foundation, which, again, their poke is pretty useless because they're just going to try and play more foundations after that. So they lost something to try and play something. Shigaraki being able to destroy a foundation through his response, and then also cards like Evil Gaze, you get to use cards like Apathetic to really help control in an even more grand scale. And then you always have this like looming damage threat that if they don't block everything, they take a lot of damage, a lot of extra damage, a lot of on the chin stuff, right? Like, and you mentioned like Touch of Decay and a lot of the cool Shigaraki attacks, and you have a really nice recipe for a burn deck. And these decks don't have a lot of life gain in them per se. They are just playing really strong long games, and I think Shigaraki can thrive in a really nice long game scenario where early game he gets to control the pace, and if he can get ahead of these decks, then he's forcing the damage through in a little bit later turns. Another deck that I think is or should be a little bit more popular right now with the rise of these super defensive late game decks is Sero 1. Sero 1 is one of the strongest decks in the game, I think, if you get the opportunity to survive. You are putting your opponent on a clock. You are always making the zones of your attacks a guessing game. Your opponent can get overloaded very easily. Your opponent can get lulled into a false sense of security very easily by holding the block zone they think you're going to call, and then you just change it completely on them. Why I particularly like Sero into these matchups, though, is he is allowing you to defend and stop their kill turn, which you can. They pretty much only ever have one opportunity, right? If you could stop their one kill turn and you use your response in a correct, appropriate manner, you are shutting them down effectively for the rest of the game and giving yourself the opportunity to throw like really great tape swing chains. Like the later the game gets, again with Sero, the longer you are able to play a string, the better you are able to use the resources you have on board and abuse them in some sorts of ways, right? Sure, your deadlock answers aren't fantastic on most of Cero's symbols, right? The symbols that he plays don't typically have great deadlock options. You could play him off of water, and that would give you some great usage. But all in all, I think that he is a very, very strong character. Primarily because like Momo is telegraphing one of her blocks most of the time, and you get to just avoid that zone altogether. So if she picks up, I don't know, a +1 low block, like she picks up instant shining flash, right? Then you can just be like, okay, well my attacks are high now. All my attacks the rest of the game are high, or all my attacks this turn are high, and you now have a dead block. Obviously, you're gonna have to get into a little bit of a mind games battle against the good players playing these decks, right? Like these aren't super surefire matchups, these aren't guaranteed matchups, but you're giving yourself an opportunity to win while playing something that's a little bit outside the box. And I think that those are really good reasons why I so far like these characters, right? And again, like Cero can extend his game so much longer than most decks, just because like if your opponent does wander into half blocking any of your moves, you're drawing extra cards. Like you're just getting so much from playing against defensive characters that I think it's worth it in the end to at least give it a shot and do some testing with it. I think the character is remarkably cool. I think he has not gotten enough credit for how cool he is since the meta has slowed down. Is he awful into Tokiyami? Probably. Is he awful into Asui? Probably. But like we're not seeing as an abundance of those. So I think that switching over to decks that can play slower games, play a more tempered game, is really good, right? Like Jiro isn't going to be even this big threat, menacingly threat, because Unwavering Slash was a big part of her game plan as well. So a lot of the aggro got toned down, which left the defensive decks wide open, right? Like it left them in a powerful position, and I think that's what should be investigated a little bit harder than we're probably going to end up seeing in some of these events. But if anybody is playing these decks, shout outs to you guys. I think these are cool decks. Another deck I wanted to talk about a little bit is Todoroki 1. I think that he presents himself a little bit better into the Kirishima game plan, right? He can stop key pickups with like Hardened Jab or key abilities on all the hardened cards, because the hardened cards are like a big part of the offense, right? They're doing a little bit of like a up down up down up down up down with their foundations, right? So you can stop a cool key ability there, or you can even stop like a Texas Smash Enhance. Plus, late game, this guy is going to be able to kill anybody. So if these decks aren't pressuring hard enough, he gets to survive through the early game. And then he gets to have just these absolutely massive bombs that he throws in the late game that all demand an answer. And if you got any poke damage in through the earlier parts of the turn, like it's huge. It's crazy. It's a lot of damage. It's very, very scary to have to play against Todoroki when he is able to throw these massive attacks and also shut down like one of your answers to him probably. I like him on fire as like a nice like targeted annoyance stack, right? You can play cards like Hellflame Javelin late into your kill turns, where you are going to have the most cards in your discard pile, so these are going to be huge. And you also get like Irrefutable Force of Nature. You can play Revel to enhance your draws towards the end of your deck. Sugar Rush Power Up to give more damage, and you have a huge deck. You're probably playing 70, 75 cards. So I think that that is a good like offensive variant, and as well you could play him as a water deck. Like you could still do the classic kind of sit around and clog your opponent's card pool towards the end of a game and then just straight nail them with damage, right? Like this is just a different brand of like a Kamui Woods. Kamui Woods is going to be a little bit better blocking strings early, and Todoroki is going to be a lot better killing people late. But you could still play the same like tongue whips into amphibious ambushes, sticky balls, eat my sticky balls kind of game plan, where you're clogging your opponent's card pool and making the game a little bit tougher for them to really get through. I'm not entirely sure about his game plan into Momo. It just seems like it slows Momo down a little bit, makes them search a little bit harder. So he's going to have to pressure Momo's board a little bit more vigorously, I'd say, than these other two characters. He's going to have to be attacking actively to try and get cards off of her board. Because if she is allowed to search up 2 cards that are a kill condition, then you're probably going to die because you can only stop one of them. But I still think he's a cool character. I think he's got a lot of legs in this meta, and I think that he isn't really explored enough these days because having that ability to just negate an effect per turn is very, very strong. Yeah, anyways, guys, I think that is kind of just a quick, brief video over what I think a couple of really strong decks can be into this slower meta. Are there other decks? Absolutely. I think there's a lot of room for decks that are setting up meteor showers late game. There's a lot of room for like explosive later game offenses. But I like these abilities of Shigaraki, Sero, and Todoroki specifically because I think that they can hang defensively with these decks. And you don't want the option of just getting blown out, potentially. You still want to be able to hang around with them and play a solid game plan along with them. All right. Anyway, guys, thanks again for watching. Be sure to leave some comments on what some more videos you want to see. We are in a little bit of a lull, a little bit of a down season for content creation because the only thing that's really to talk about is previews, and honestly, all of the content creators talk about previews all the time. So there's not really room for me in that sphere, like the sphere of the internet. This doesn't really exist. So if you guys want to talk to me about what videos you think would be cool, like what do you guys want to learn, what do you guys want to see, what are you guys thinking? I would be happy to talk about it. And hopefully one of you guys takes the advice with some of these decks, gives it some good testing, and can do really well with it. Anyway, guys, thanks again. My name is Phil Birch from Unfun Stuff. And till next time, guys.